Imagine kicking down a door, expecting easy prey, only to realize you have walked straight into a lion's den. That is exactly what happened to two con artists posing as police officers in a quiet Chicago suburb. They thought the Washington family was just another target for their sick civil forfeiture scam, a way to steal cash and terrorize innocent people. But they made one fatal mistake. They did not check who lived there. The Washingtons were not just a family. They were a tactical unit of the FBI's most elite agents enjoying a quiet afternoon together. What happens when fake authority meets real power? You're about to find out. This is the story of the worst raid and the best justice. The engine of the beat-up Ford Crown Victoria ticked as it cooled, hidden in the shadows of a weeping willow 2 blocks from 420 Briarwood Lane. It was a humid afternoon in Oak Park, Illinois. The air hung heavy, filled with the constant electric buzz of cicadas. Inside the car sat 2 men who looked the part, at least from a distance. In the driver's seat was Harlan Gannon, a man whose face looked like it had been carved from rough granite and left to weather in the rain. He wore a generic tactical vest over a black polo shirt, a plastic badge clipped to his belt that read, Special Task Force. He went by Sarge when they were working, though he had been dishonorably discharged from the Army years earlier for selling equipment on the black market. Beside him sat Lester Cogan, younger, sweatier, and infinitely more nervous. Lester was the muscle, though he looked more like dough that had risen too long. He was fiddling with a pair of handcuffs, clicking them open and shut. "Quit it!" Harlan snapped, his eyes glued to the binoculars trained on the colonial-style brick house down the street. "I'm just saying, Harlan, this house looks big," Lester muttered, wiping his palms on his cargo pants. "Big houses mean alarms. Big houses mean lawyers. Big houses mean cash. Cash, you idiot!" Harlan growled, lowering the binoculars. "We've been watching them for days. No private security patrols, dos deux. No dogs, just a nice, wealthy black family living the American dream. And you know what the American dream runs on? Cash stashed in safes under mattresses. They own that dry cleaning chain downtown. Guaranteed they skim off the top. We go in, we flash the badges, we find some coke in the sofa, and we tell them we can make it all go away for a seizure of their assets on site. It was a scam they had run many times. They targeted minority families in affluent neighborhoods, banking on the fear of police brutality to ensure compliance. They relied on the silence of their victims, people too afraid to report the officers who robbed them, fearing retaliation. It was predatory. It was evil. And until today, it had been perfectly safe. Inside 420 Briarwood, the atmosphere was a stark contrast to the predatory gloom of the Crown Vic. Dominic Washington stood over a sprawling kitchen island, meticulously chopping bell peppers. At 55, Dominic was a mountain of a man with broad shoulders that strained his linen shirt and hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon. He was not just cooking, he was orchestrating. "Catherine, tell Tyrell to get off the phone. We don't do devices at the table," Dominic called out, his voice a deep, resonant baritone that carried without shouting. Catherine Washington walked in from the patio, holding a bowl of fresh salad. She was elegant, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a tight bun. She moved with a fluid grace that belied her age. "He's not scrolling, Dom. He's finishing a briefing. He has an early flight to D.C. The Bureau doesn't sleep, but it can nap for gumbo," Dominic grumbled, though he smiled. Tyrell Washington, looking like a younger, sharper clone of his father, walked into the kitchen. He slid his phone into his pocket. "Briefing filed. Sorry, Dad. The cartel case in Laredo is heating up." "Work talk later," said a voice from the hallway. Alicia, the youngest, leaned against the doorframe. She was dressed in jogging sweats, looking deceptively casual. "I smell the roux. Are we eating, or are we waiting for the neighbors to invite themselves over? They were a picture-perfect family, but the neighbors did not know the truth. They knew Dominic was a consultant, and Catherine worked in accounting. They did not know that Dominic Washington was the special agent in charge of the Chicago field office for the FBI. They did not know Catherine was a senior forensic accountant who had taken down Ponzi schemes worth billions. They did not know Tyrell was a rising star in the DEA's Special Operations Unit, or that Alicia, the baby of the family, was an undercover operative for the ATF who had spent recent months infiltrating a biker gang in Ohio. Under this one roof sat roughly 100 years of combined federal law enforcement experience. They were trained to detect lies, disarm threats, and neutralize targets, and Harlan and Lester were about to knock on their door. "It's go time," Harlan said, watching the lights flicker in the kitchen. They're all in one room. Element of surprise. Remember, aggressive entry. Don't give them time to think. If the big guy moves, you tase him. Do not shoot unless you have to. Dead bodies bring real cops. Lester nodded, swallowing hard. He pulled a black balaclava over his face. Harlan did the same. They checked their weapons. Illegal 9mm with serial numbers filed off, just in case things went south. They exited the car, closing the door softly. The street was empty. The sun was beginning to dip, casting long, deceiving shadows. They moved quickly across the manicured lawn, boots crushing the pristine grass. They reached the front porch. Harlan held up 3 fingers. 3, 2, 1. The sound of the front door splintering was like a gunshot. Harlan did not bother picking the lock. He used a battering ram they had stolen from a surplus store. The heavy oak door gave way with a sickening crunch of wood and metal. "Police! Search warrant! Get on the ground now! Now! Now!" Harlan screamed, his voice tearing through the serene afternoon. He stormed into the foyer, gun drawn, sweeping the barrel back and forth. Lester was right behind him, looking bulkier and clumsier, shouting incoherent commands. "Hands! Show me hands! Get down!" They rushed toward the kitchen, boots thudding heavily on the hardwood floors. In most raids, this is the moment of total collapse for the victims. There is screaming. There is crying. People drop to their knees, begging, their minds short-circuiting from the sudden violence. That did not happen here. Dominic Washington did not drop the knife he was using to chop peppers. He simply stopped moving. He set the knife down on the cutting board with a deliberate, slow click. He did not turn around immediately. He wiped his hands on a towel. Catherine froze, her eyes narrowing, not in fear, but in sharp calculation. She took a half-step back, positioning herself near the heavy marble counter. Tyrell and Alicia, who were seated at the island, did not scramble. They both went still, their postures shifting instantly from relaxed to coiled. Tyrell's hands came up slowly, palms open, fingers spread. Alicia's eyes darted to the reflection in the oven door, assessing the threat behind her. "I said get the hell on the ground!" Harlan roared, entering the kitchen. He aimed his Glock directly at Dominic's back. "Turn around slowly. Hands where I can see them." Dominic turned. He was 6'4", and even in his apron he looked imposing. His face was a mask of stone. He looked at Harlan, then at Lester. He looked at the guns. He looked at their stances. "Officer," Dominic said, his voice terrifyingly calm, "you didn't announce your precinct, and you just kicked in the door of a private residence without ringing the bell. That's a Fourth Amendment violation unless you have exigent circumstances." "Shut up!" Lester yelled, jittery. He waved his gun toward Alicia. "You little girl, get on the floor face down!" Alicia looked at Lester. She saw the sweat on his brow. She saw the way his finger was trembling on the trigger guard, not the trigger itself, but slipping. Amateur, she thought. Dangerously amateur. I'm complying, Alicia said, her voice steady. She slowly lowered herself from the stool to her knees, but she did not lay flat. She kept her weight on the balls of her feet, a sprinter's stance, ready to launch. "Everyone on the ground!" Harlan shouted, sweating now. The lack of panic was throwing him off. Why weren't they screaming? Why was the father looking at his boots? "We have a warrant," Harlan lied, pulling a crumpled, coffee-stained piece of paper from his vest and waving it too fast for anyone to read. "We have reports of narcotics distribution from this address. This is a raid." "Narcotics?" Catherine repeated, her tone dry. She looked at the expensive granite countertops, the fresh vegetables, the lack of any drug paraphernalia. "From this address? You're sure?" "Don't give me lip, lady." Harlan stepped forward, shoving the barrel of his gun toward Tyrell. "Cuff him, Buzz. Cuff the big one first." Lester holstered his weapon, a tactical error, and pulled out the handcuffs. He approached Dominic. Dominic looked at Tyrell. A micro-expression passed between them. A slight nod. "Wait. Turn around," Lester grunted, grabbing Dominic's arm. Dominic allowed himself to be turned. As the cold metal clicked around his wrists, he felt the weight of the cuffs. They were Smith & Wesson Model 100s, standard issue, but they were old, with a rusty hinge, and Lester squeezed them too tight. "You're making a mistake," Dominic said quietly. "The only mistake was you selling dope in my district," Harlan sneered. He began tearing through the kitchen drawers, throwing silverware onto the floor. Clatter. Crash. He opened the pantry and swept shelves of spices onto the ground. He was making a show of looking for drugs, but his eyes were scanning for the safe. "Where's the money? We know you have it. Tell us where the cash is, and maybe we forget to take your son to jail." Tyrell, now kneeling beside his sister, spoke up. "You're offering a quid pro quo? Asset forfeiture in exchange for non-arrest? That's highly irregular procedure, officer. What was your name?" Harlan froze. He looked at Tyrell. The young man's eyes were cold, analytical. "Officer Rattle," Harlan improvised, using a nickname from his high school days. "Officer Rattle and Sergeant Bull, and you don't ask the questions here, boy." "Rattle and Bull," Alicia murmured, almost laughing. "Sounds like a morning zoo radio show." "Shut your mouth!" Lester shouted, raising a hand as if to strike her. Alicia did not flinch. She stared at his raised hand. "You hit me," she said, her voice dropping an octave. "And you will never use that hand again." The threat was so specific, so devoid of fear, that Lester actually paused. He looked at Harlan. "Harlan, this feels wrong." "Just find the cash," Harlan yelled, abandoning the pantry. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, clear baggie filled with white powder, baking soda mixed with crushed aspirin, the evidence. "Look what I found!" Harlan shouted, tossing the baggie onto the kitchen island. "Cocaine, right here in the open. That's 20 years. Easy, unless—" He leaned in close to Catherine. "Unless we can come to an arrangement." Catherine looked at the baggie. Then she looked at Harlan. "You planted that," she stated. It was not a question. "It's your word against ours," Harlan grinned, revealing yellow teeth. "And we're the police." Dominic, cuffed and facing the wall, closed his eyes and exhaled. He had seen enough. The assessment was complete. These were not cops. They were thugs, and they had just threatened his family. "Tyrell," Dominic said. "Yeah, Dad. Is the safety off on the lead suspect's weapon?" "No, Dad. It's a Glock. No external safety. But his finger is inside the guard. He has poor trigger discipline." "Alicia," Dominic continued. "The second suspect, weapon status? Holstered. Retention strap is undone. He forgot to snap it after he cuffed you." "Catherine," Dominic said. "What's the charge for impersonating a federal officer?" 3 years per count," Catherine replied instantly. plus armed robbery, kidnapping, breaking and entering, and assault with a deadly weapon. I'd say they're looking at 40 to life, consecutive. Harlan stepped back, the color draining from his face. What the hell are you people talking about? Dominic turned around. He ignored the gun pointed at him. He looked Harlan dead in the eye, and the air in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. We're talking about your sentencing hearing, Officer Rattle, Dominic said. Because you didn't just break into a house, you broke into the residence of the FBI special agent in charge for the Northern District of Illinois. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Harlan blinked. He looked at Dominic, then at the scattered groceries, then back at Dominic. His brain was trying to process the information, but it was jamming like a rusty gun. You're lying, am I? Dominic asked. He shifted his weight. In the drawer to your left, third one down, under the takeout menus, there's a leather wallet. Open it. Harlan hesitated. His gun wavered. Open it! Dominic barked. The command had the weight of decades of authority behind it. It was not a request. Harlan reached out with his left hand, keeping the gun trained on Dominic with his right, though his aim was drifting. He yanked the drawer open, rummaged under the menus, and pulled out a black leather bifold. He flipped it open. A gold shield gleamed in the kitchen light. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Special Agent in Charge. Dominic J. Washington. Harlan's stomach dropped through the floor. He felt like he was falling. He looked at the ID photo, then at the man standing in front of him. It was the same face. Oh no, Lester whispered. Harlan, let's go. Let's just go. We can't just go, you idiot, Harlan hissed, panic starting to fray the edges of his voice. We broke the door. We assaulted them. You have a choice, Tyrell said from the floor. He was still on his knees, but he had shifted. His legs were coiled under him. You can put the weapons down, lie on the floor, and wait for the real police to arrive, or you can try to leave. If you try to leave, you add resisting arrest and flight to your charges, and we will stop you. You're cuffed, Harlan shouted, trying to regain control. He waved the gun wildly now. I'm the one with the gun. I'm in charge here. You're holding a weapon, Alicia corrected. But you're not in charge. You lost control of this room minutes ago. He was a rat in a trap. His instinct was to run, but his greed and his pride were anchoring him. If he left now, he was done. Maybe he could salvage it. If he killed them? No. Too many. Federal agents. He would be hunted to the ends of the earth. Get up, Harlan ordered Lester. Get them all in the living room. Tie them up. We got to think. Harlan, that's an FBI boss, Lester squeaked. We got to run. Do it! Harlan screamed. Lester scrambled to grab Alicia. He reached for her arm. That was the mistake. Alicia did not wait. As Lester's hand closed on her bicep, she exploded into motion. She trapped his hand against her body with her own arm, stepped in close, and drove her elbow backward into his solar plexus. Lester let out a sound like a deflating tire. Oof! He doubled over. Alicia spun, grabbed his wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him onto the hardwood floor. Slam! In the same second, Tyrell moved. He did not stand up. He lunged forward from his knees, diving toward Harlan's legs. Harlan panicked. He tried to aim down, but Tyrell was too fast. Tyrell's shoulder hit Harlan's knees, buckling them. Harlan went down hard, his gun skittering across the floor and sliding under the refrigerator. Catherine! Dominic shouted, kicking the dropped gun further away. Dominic, still cuffed, saw Lester trying to reach for his backup ankle holster. Dominic stepped forward and brought his boot down hard on Lester's hand. Ah! Lester screamed. Harlan was scrambling, trying to crawl toward the door. Tyrell was on top of him in a second, applying a rear-naked choke. Stop fighting, Tyrell commanded, his voice tight. "Stop fighting or you go to sleep." Harlan flailed, punching backward, but Tyrell's grip was iron. Within seconds, Harlan's struggles slowed. His face turned red, then purple. He went limp. Alicia had Lester pinned face down. She had twisted his own arm behind his back at a painful angle. "Move 1 inch," she whispered into his ear, "and I break the shoulder. Do you understand?" "I understand! I understand!" "Just guys, I understand, please," Lester sobbed into the floorboards. The room went quiet, save for the heavy breathing of the struggle and Lester's whimpering. Dominic stood over them, the handcuffs still on his wrists. He looked at his family. "Everyone okay?" "I'm good," Alicia said. "Secure," Tyrell said, checking Harlan's pulse. "He's out. He'll be back in a minute." Catherine walked over to the drawer where they kept the spare keys. She retrieved a small handcuff key, because of course a family of agents had one in the kitchen junk drawer. She walked over to Dominic and unlocked his cuffs. Dominic rubbed his wrists. He looked at the 2 men on his floor. The predators. "Catherine," Dominic said, his voice calm again. "Call it in. Tell dispatch we have 2 suspects in custody at my residence. Attempted armed robbery, impersonation of an officer, and tell them to send a squad to pick up the trash." "On it," Catherine said, picking up her phone. But just as she dialed, sirens wailed in the distance. Not one siren. Many. Harlan groaned and started to wake up. He blinked, looking up at the ceiling, then at the towering figure of Dominic Washington standing over him. You called them already?" Harlan rasped. "We didn't have to," Dominic said, crossing his arms. "You see, Officer Rattle, you triggered a silent alarm when you kicked the door. But not a burglar alarm, a panic alarm linked directly to the Chicago field office. My team isn't coming because I called them. They're coming because they think their boss is under attack, and they are going to be very unhappy to meet you." Outside, the screech of tires signaled the arrival of the cavalry. Blue and red lights flooded through the broken front door, painting the hallway in chaotic flashes. The raid was over. The nightmare for Harlan and Lester was just beginning. The living room of 420 Briarwood Lane had transformed from a cozy family space into a tactical holding zone. Harlan Gannon and Lester Cogan lay face down on the Persian rug, their hands zip-tied behind their backs, with industrial-grade restraints that Tyrell had retrieved from his go-bag in the hall closet. The wail of sirens outside had reached a deafening crescendo. It was not just a patrol car. It sounded like an invasion. "You guys are in so much trouble," Lester whimpered, his face pressed against the wool fibers. "You assaulted officers. My uncle is a sergeant in the 14th District. You can't do this." Alicia, who was leaning against the mantelpiece checking her nails, did not even look down. "Your uncle could be the police commissioner, Lester. It wouldn't matter. You're in federal jurisdiction now." "Federal?" Harlan spat, trying to lift his head. "This is a house. It's local PD jurisdiction." Dominic Washington walked back into the room. He had removed his apron. He was now wearing his suit jacket, which he had casually thrown over his t-shirt. It was a jarring look. Half Sunday dad, half federal executive. But on him, it looked terrifying. Under Title 18, United States Code. Section 111, Dominic recited from memory, his voice booming. Assaulting, resisting, or impeding certain officers or employees while engaged in the performance of official duties is a federal crime. Since you broke into the home of a federal agent to impede an investigation, even a fictional one, you've crossed the line. "We didn't know!" Harlan yelled. "That's entrapment." "That's not what entrapment means," Catherine said, stepping into the room with a tablet in her hand. "And ignorance of the victim's identity isn't a defense." Suddenly, the front door, already hanging off its hinges, was kicked fully open. "FBI! Blue team, go, go, go. 6 figures clad in full, heavy tactical gear streamed into the hallway. They moved with a fluidity and violence that made Harlan and Lester's earlier entry look like a toddler's tantrum. M4 carbines were raised, tactical lights blindingly bright, sweeping every corner of the room in seconds. Clear left, clear right, 2 subjects secured on deck. The lead operator, a man whose helmet obscured everything but his eyes, lowered his weapon slightly when he saw Dominic. He signaled his team to hold. "Boss!" the operator barked. "Status?" "Code 4, Reynolds," Dominic said calmly. "Family is safe. 2 intruders secured. They claim to be serving a warrant." Reynolds, the SWAT team leader, lifted his visor. He looked at the 2 men on the floor, then at the shattered doorframe, then back at his boss. A confused grin spread across his face. "You're kidding? These 2 mopes tried to hit the castle?" "They did," Tyrell said, stepping forward and shaking Reynolds' hand. "Good to see you, Jim. Fast response time. We were already geared up for another operation," Reynolds laughed. "Dispatch set officer down at the SAC's house. We thought it was a cartel hit squad. Turns out it's just Dumb and Dumber." Harlan felt a cold knot of dread tighten in his stomach. These men knew each other. They were not just colleagues, they were a fraternity, and he had just pissed on their clubhouse door. "Get them up," Reynolds ordered his team. 2 operators hauled Harlan and Lester to their feet. The fake cops looked small and pathetic next to the armored giants of the FBI SWAT team. "Walk," Reynolds commanded. They were marched out the front door. The scene outside was a spectacle. The quiet suburban street was ablaze with flashing lights. There were 3 FBI SUVs, 2 Oak Park police cruisers, and an unmarked van. Neighbors had gathered on their lawns, phones out, recording everything. Mrs. Higgins, the elderly woman from across the street who spent her days gardening and watching the neighborhood like a hawk, was standing by her hedge. She pointed a trembling finger at Harlan as he was dragged past. "That's them," she shouted to a uniformed officer. "That's the car that's been parking under the willow tree. I told you they looked suspicious." Harlan hung his head. The shame was burning him alive. He had built a persona of fear and authority. He was Sarge, the man who kicked down doors and took what he wanted. Now he was being paraded in front of soccer moms and retirees, handcuffed and helpless, while the man he tried to rob stood on the porch shaking hands with the chief of police. Dominic Washington stood on his front steps, flanked by Catherine, Tyrell, and Alicia. He looked like a king surveying his kingdom. "Take them to the downtown holding facility," Dominic told the officers. "Federal processing. Do not, I repeat, do not let them talk to anyone until I get there. Full isolation." "Yes, sir," the officer replied. As they were shoved into the back of a heavily armored transport van, Lester looked at Harlan with tears streaming down his face. "Harlan, you said this was easy money. You said they were just a dry cleaning family." Harlan stared at the metal grate separating them from the driver. "Shut up, Lester, just shut up." But the nightmare was only starting. As the van pulled away, Harlan saw Tyrell Washington standing by the curb. The young agent tapped his wrist, a gesture that said, "Time is ticking," and smiled. It was not a nice smile. It was the smile of a hunter who had just trapped a wolf. The interrogation room at the FBI Chicago field office was designed to be uncomfortable. The air conditioning was set just a few degrees too cold. The fluorescent lights hummed at a frequency that drilled into the skull. The table was bolted to the floor, the chairs were hard metal, and the mirror on the wall was vast and judgmental. Harlan Gannon had been sitting there for hours. He was alone. They had separated him from Lester immediately upon arrival. No one had spoken to him. No one had read him his rights yet. They had simply taken his belt, his shoelaces, and his dignity. Then left him to stew in the silence. He knew the tactic. It was called letting them marinate. It gave the suspect time to think about every mistake they had made, to let the paranoia fester. Harlan tried to compose himself. "Stick to the story," he told himself. "We went to the wrong house. It was a mistake. We're private investigators. We thought we were serving a fugitive recovery warrant. Yeah, that's it, we're bounty hunters. We got bad intel. It's a misunderstanding. We'll get a slap on the wrist for trespassing." The door clicked. Harlan straightened up, ready to spin his web of lies. He expected a lawyer, or maybe a generic suit. Instead, the door opened, and in walked Catherine Washington. She was not wearing her cooking clothes anymore. She was dressed in a sharp navy blazer and slacks, holding a thick file folder. She did not look like the mother making salad in the kitchen. She looked like the senior forensic accountant she was, a woman who could find a missing penny in $1 billion budget. She did not sit down. She threw the file onto the metal table. It landed with a heavy thud that echoed in the small room. "Mrs. Washington?" Harlan started, trying to sound polite. "Look, I want to apologize. This is all a big—" "Save it," Catherine said. Her voice was ice. "I'm not here to hear your apology. I'm here to tell you how your life ends." "My life?" Harlan scoffed, trying to regain some bravado. "Lady, I broke a door. I didn't kill anyone. I'll do 6 months probation." Catherine pulled a chair out and sat, opening the file. She did not look at him. She looked at the papers. Harlan Gannon. Dishonorable discharge, U.S. Army, years earlier. Theft of government property. 2 years in Leavenworth. Released after. Since then, you've been a ghost. No declared income, no taxes filed. Yet you pay rent on a luxury apartment in the Gold Coast in cash. You drive a recent model Ford Explorer, not the Crown Vic you use today, registered to a shell company in Delaware. Harlan's mouth went dry. How? How do you know all that? I'm an accountant, Harlan. Following the money is what I do. And you, my friend, are very sloppy with your money. She slid a photo across the table. It was a picture of the Crown Victoria they had driven to the raid. "We searched the car," Catherine said. "Do you know what we found in the trunk? Besides the illegal firearms and the bolt cutters?" Harlan stayed silent. "We found a ledger," she said. "A handwritten notebook. Names, addresses, dates, and dollar amounts." Harlan felt the blood drain from his face. The ledger. Lester was supposed to burn it. Why was it in the car? "Page 1, Catherine read. "The Miller family, Evanston. Seized $15,000 cash." Page 2. "The Gupta family, Skokie. Seized jewelry and $8,000. Page 3. The list goes on, Harlan. Dozens of names. Dozens of families. She looked up, her eyes burning with intensity. "You haven't just been robbing people. You've been targeting immigrant families and minority business owners. People you thought wouldn't call the police. People you thought were weak." "That book isn't mine," Harlan stammered. "I never saw it before. You planted it." "We ran the handwriting analysis while you were sitting in here for hours," Catherine said smoothly. "It matches the signature on your driver's license application perfectly. We also found Lester's fingerprints on every page." Harlan slumped in his chair. The private investigator story was dead. "So," Catherine continued, leaning forward, "this isn't a burglary charge anymore, Harlan. This is a RICO case. A Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act case. We have a pattern of racketeering activity. We have a criminal enterprise. And since you impersonated federal officers during several of these stops, we have federal jurisdiction on every single count." "I want a lawyer," Harlan whispered. "You'll get one," Catherine said. "But first, you should know what Lester is doing right now." She pressed a button on the remote control in her hand. A TV screen on the wall flickered to life. It showed the adjacent interrogation room. Lester Cogan was sitting there, sobbing, talking to Tyrell Washington. The audio crackled through the speaker. "It was Harlan's idea, all of it," Lester was blubbering on the screen. "He said they were easy targets. He said the Washingtons had a safe in the basement. I didn't want to go in. He made me." Tyrell on the screen nodded sympathetically. "And the gun, Lester? Who filed the serial numbers off?" "Harlan did. He has a drill press in his garage. I can show you." Harlan stared at the screen, betrayed. "That little rat." "He's cutting a deal, Harlan," Catherine said, turning off the TV. "He's giving us everything. The fence you used to sell the jewelry. The corrupt clerk at the DM5 who gave you the addresses. He's giving us the whole network." Catherine stood up and walked to the door. She paused, her hand on the handle. "You came into my kitchen," she said softly. "You threatened my children. You pointed a gun at my husband. You thought you were the predator, but you walked into a house full of wolves, Harlan. And now we're going to eat you alive." She opened the door to leave. "Wait," Harlan shouted, desperation clawing at his throat. "Wait. I can give you something. I know people. I know about the cartel shipments." Catherine stopped. She turned around slowly. "Cartel shipments?" Harlan nodded frantically. "Yeah. The guys we sell the stolen goods to. They move other stuff. Big stuff. I can give you names. Just don't bury me." Catherine looked at him for a long moment. A small, satisfied smile played on her lips. This was the twist they had suspected. These low-level thugs were the bottom feeders of a much larger ecosystem. "Tyrell," she said to the empty room, knowing her son was listening on the other side of the mirror. "Come in here. Mr. Gannon wants to talk about the Chicago syndicate." The door opened again. Tyrell walked in, holding a notepad. He looked fresh, energized, and ready to work. "Well, Harlan," Tyrell said, sitting in the chair his mother had vacated. "Let's see if your information is worth more than the decades you're currently facing. Start talking. And remember, we check facts for a living." Harlan Gannon, the man who had kicked down the door like a king just hours ago, began to talk. He spilled everything. He burned every bridge, betrayed every contact, and dug his own grave in hopes of getting a slightly softer pillow in his coffin. But he did not realize that the Washingtons were not just looking for justice for themselves. They were building a case that would tear down the entire criminal underworld of the South Side. And Harlan was the first domino. The trial of United States versus Harlan Gannon and Lester Kogan did not just make the news. It became a national spectacle. The security footage from the Washington home, captured by the discreet cameras hidden in the crown molding, had been released to the public and went viral within hours. The video showed two men in tactical gear kicking down a door, terrorizing a family, and then being systematically dismantled by that same family in under a minute. It was shared across social media millions of times. The hashtag Washington Defense was trending globally. But inside the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago, there was no laughter. The atmosphere was grave. Harlan Gannon sat at the defense table, looking like a husk of the man he had been. His tactical gear was replaced by an orange jumpsuit that hung loosely on his frame. He had been denied bail, deemed a flight risk due to his offshore accounts and lack of verified employment. His court-appointed attorney, a weary public defender named Marcus Thorne, knew this was a losing battle. But Harlan insisted on fighting. He refused to plead guilty to the kidnapping charges, believing he could convince a jury that he truly thought he was a private contractor conducting a lawful citizen's arrest. It was a delusional defense born of desperation. Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Jenkins was leading the prosecution. She was known as the Shark in the Northern District, and she smelled blood. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Jenkins began her opening statement, pacing slowly in front of the box. "The defense will tell you this was a mistake, a bad judgment call. But the evidence will show you this was not an accident. This was a lifestyle. Harlan Gannon and Lester Cogan were predators. They hunted families they believed were voiceless. They used the badge, a symbol of trust, as a weapon of terror. But on that day, they picked the wrong door. The trial lasted weeks. The most damaging testimony did not come from Dominic or Tyrell. It came from Alicia Washington. Alicia took the stand. She wore a simple gray suit, looking every bit the professional young woman. But when she spoke, the steel of an undercover operative shone through. "Ms. Washington," Jenkins asked, "when the defendant, Mr. Cogan, told you to get on the ground, did you feel fear?" Alicia looked directly at Lester, who was weeping silently at the defense table. "I felt concern for my parents," she said calmly. "But fear? No. I assessed the threat. I saw two men with poor training holding weapons they didn't know how to control. I wasn't afraid of them. I was afraid of what I would have to do to stop them." "And what did Mr. Gannon say regarding the drugs he found?" "He produced a bag of baking soda from his pocket," Alicia replied. "He placed it on our counter and offered to make it go away for cash. It was a shakedown, pure and simple." The courtroom murmured. The jury, 12 ordinary citizens, looked at Harlan with undisguised disgust. But the final nail in the coffin was the ledger. Catherine Washington's forensic team had decrypted Harlan's laptop, which they found in his apartment after the arrest. It was not just a list of dozens of families. It was a detailed accounting of years of theft. Over $4 million in cash, jewelry, and electronics stolen from immigrants, elderly couples, and small business owners. Harlan had noted everything. He even had a column titled "Compliance Level," rating how easily the victims gave up their money. Next to the Washington name, in the entry he had pre-written before the raid, he had typed, "Target high value, compliance likely high." When a USA Jenkins projected that image onto the screen, Harlan put his head in his hands. The jury deliberated for a short time. "We find the defendant, Harlan Gannon, guilty on all counts," the foreman read. "Guilty of impersonating a federal officer, guilty of kidnapping, guilty of armed robbery, guilty of RICO conspiracy, guilty of assault on a federal agent." Judge Harrison, a stern woman who had spent years on the bench, looked over her spectacles at Harlan. "Mr. Gannon," she said, her voice echoing in the silent room, "in my time on this bench, I have seen murderers, drug lords, and terrorists, but rarely have I seen someone as cowardly as you. You preyed on the fear of good people. You exploited the trust the public places in law enforcement. You are a stain on this city." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. "For the crimes committed, and due to the federal sentencing enhancements for targeting federal officers and using a firearm in a crime of violence, I sentence you to 45 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of parole." Harlan gasped. 45 years. He would die in prison. Lester Cogan, who had testified against Harlan in exchange for leniency, received 12 years. He was led away, sobbing. As the marshals grabbed Harlan to haul him away, he looked back at the gallery. Dominic Washington sat in the front row, his arm around Catherine. Tyrell and Alicia were on either side. They were not smiling. They were not gloating. They just watched him with a cold, professional detachment. To them, he was not a villain anymore. He was just a closed case. The steel gates of the federal penitentiary slammed shut with a finality that echoed in Harlan Gannon's bones. It was a sound he would come to know intimately, the sound of his life ending. He was processed into the system, not as Sarge or a special task force leader, but as inmate number whatever. The intake officers, real federal employees who viewed him with undisguised contempt, stripped him of everything. His clothes, his dignity, were replaced by a rough orange jumpsuit and a pair of canvas slip-ons that were 2 sizes too small. "You like playing cop?" one of the guards sneered as he tossed Harlan a thin, scratchy blanket. Well, in here, you're not the law. You're the punchline. Harlan was assigned to general population. It was a death sentence, and everyone knew it. In the federal system, there is a hierarchy. At the top are the cartel bosses and gang leaders, men who wield power even from behind bars. Below them are the soldiers, the bank robbers, the fraudsters. But at the very bottom, lower even than the snitches, are the impostors, the men who wore the badge to prey on the weak. To the criminals inside, Harlan was a badge bunny, a fake cop who had used the authority they hated to steal from their families. For the first week, Harlan tried to be invisible. He kept his head down in the chow hall, eating his flavorless slop quickly and rushing back to his cell. He avoided eye contact in the showers. He volunteered for the lowest jobs, scrubbing toilets, just to stay away from the yard during peak hours. But news in prison travels fast. The story of the Washington raid had been broadcast on the unit's communal TVs. Every inmate knew his face. They knew he had kicked down the door of a black family, terrorized them, and tried to frame them. They knew he was a coward. The karma arrived under a gray, suffocating sky. Harlan was in the recreation yard trying to get some fresh air near the perimeter fence. He was doing push-ups, a desperate attempt to look tough, to look like he belonged. A shadow fell over him. It was not just one man. It was three. Harlan stopped. He looked up to see a trio of inmates standing between him and the guard tower. They were members of a powerful gang with reach across the Midwest. The man in the center, a short, stocky figure with a spiderweb tattoo on his neck, smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile a butcher gives a hog. "Stand up, officer," the man said. Harlan scrambled to his feet, dusting off his hands. I'm not a cop," he stammered, his voice betraying his terror. "I never was. Just a misunderstanding." "We know what you are," the man said, stepping closer. "My name is Hector. You remember the name Ramirez?" Harlan's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. Ramirez? The name was common, but the specific tone Hector used triggered a flash of memory. Years earlier, a small auto body shop in Cicero. Harlan and Lester had raided it, claiming they had a warrant for stolen parts. They had zip-tied the owner, a man named Mateo Ramirez, in front of his employees. They had confiscated a large sum in cash from the office safe, money meant for payroll. "Mateo Ramirez was my uncle," Hector said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. "After you took his operating cash, he couldn't pay the bank. He lost the shop. He lost his house. He died of a heart attack months later from the stress. You killed him, Harlan." I didn't kill anyone," Harlan pleaded, backing up until his spine hit the chain-link fence. The wire dug into his back. "I just took the money. It was just money." "To you, it was just money," Hector said, pulling a shank, a sharpened piece of metal filed from a bed frame, from his sleeve. To him, it was his life. The attack was not a frenzy. It was a calculated execution of pain. Hector did not go for the heart or the throat immediately. He lunged forward and drove the shank into Harlan's thigh, twisting it. Harlan screamed, a high-pitched, pathetic sound that drew no attention from the guards who were mysteriously looking the other way. "That's for the shop," Hector grunted. He struck again, slashing Harlan across the ribs. "That's for the house." Harlan collapsed to the gravel, curling into a fetal ball, sobbing. Please, I'll pay you back. I have money stashed. I can get you money." "Your money is gone, Harlan," Hector spat, kicking him in the stomach. "The feds took it all. You have nothing. You are nothing." The beating lasted for moments. By the time the alarms finally blared and the guards came running with pepper spray, Harlan Gannon was a broken mess of blood and regret. He had a punctured lung, several broken ribs, a fractured orbital socket, and a permanent limp. He spent months in the prison infirmary, handcuffed to a bed, eating through a straw. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the reality that awaited him, because he was now a marked man. Harlan could not go back to general population. He was moved to administrative segregation, solitary confinement. This was the true hard karma. For years to come, Harlan Gannon lived in a concrete box the size of a parking space. 23 hours a day, he stared at a gray wall. 1 hour a day, he was allowed into a slightly larger cage for recreation, alone. No human contact, no easy scores, no power. He had wanted to be a man of authority, a man who commanded fear. Now he was the most frightened creature in the entire federal system. Every time the food slot in his door opened, he flinched, terrified that Hector's reach extended to the kitchen staff. That glass or bleach would be in his mashed potatoes. He aged rapidly. His hair turned white and fell out. His skin became pasty and translucent. He forgot the sound of his own voice. The wolf of the suburbs had become a rat in a trap, gnawing on his own memories until there was nothing left but madness. While Harlan Gannon rotted in his concrete tomb, life at 420 Briarwood Lane blossomed. In the time since the raid, the atmosphere was lighter, cleaner. The front door of the Washington home had been replaced. The new one was solid mahogany, reinforced with a steel core and a biometric lock, a gift from the Bureau's technical division. In the backyard, the grill was sizzling. Dominic Washington stood over a rack of ribs, basting them with his secret sauce. He looked younger than he had before. The stress of the trial was gone, replaced by a quiet satisfaction. "Hey, Dad," Tyrell called out, walking onto the patio with a cooler of drinks. "Did you see the final vote count? The bill against civil asset forfeiture abuses?" "Passed the Senate unanimously," Dominic said, flipping a rib. "No more civil asset forfeiture without a criminal conviction in the state of Illinois. And mandatory body cams for all plainclothes task forces executing warrants." "He actually did some good," Alicia said, walking out with a bowl of potato salad. She looked vibrant, her hair grown out, the undercover tension gone from her shoulders. Harlan Gannon changed the law. He just had to ruin his life to do it. "We changed the law, sweetheart," Catherine said, stepping out of the house with a pitcher of lemonade. Harlan was just the symptom. We were the cure. Catherine set the lemonade down and looked at her family. They were all there. Tyrell had brought his fiancée, a sharp-witted prosecutor from D.C. named Sarah. Alicia was laughing, teasing her older brother about his grilling technique. But there was more. The Washington raid had not just changed laws, it had changed the culture of the neighborhood. Mrs. Higgins, the neighbor who had once suspiciously watched every car, now waved from across the fence. The community had rallied around the Washingtons. They were not just the black family in the big house anymore. They were the protectors. They were the people who had stood up to the bullies and won. "Dinner's ready," Dominic announced, his deep voice carrying over the yard. They sat down at the long table. As they passed the plates, cornbread, coleslaw, the famous ribs, Dominic tapped his glass for a toast. "To family," Dominic said, raising his glass. "To justice," Tyrell added. "To aim," Alicia winked, mimicking a shooting stance. "To truth," Catherine finished. They clinked glasses. The sun began to set, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn. The cicadas hummed their electric song, a sound that used to signal the heat of the day, but now felt like a chorus of peace. Far away, in a cold cell, Harlan Gannon sat on his bunk, staring at a spider crawling up the wall. He had no view of the sunset. He had no ribs. He had no family. He had only the echoing silence of a life wasted on greed. He had tried to steal the American dream from a family that had built it brick by brick. He did not understand that you cannot steal what is forged in fire. You can break a door. You can point a gun. But you cannot break a bond like the one at this table. Dominic took a bite of his ribs, looked at his wife, and smiled. The nightmare was a distant memory. The wolves had come to the door, and the lions had simply eaten them. And that was the sweetest justice of all. This is the story of how two fake cops picked a fight with the wrong family and lost everything. It is a brutal reminder that true power is not about a badge or a gun. It is about integrity, training, and family. Harlan and Lester thought they were the predators, but they ended up as prey in a cage of their own making.